Blood streaked across the horizon as Denali Blackfoot stumbled through the unyielding wilderness, her feet raw and bleeding from 3 days of walking. The year was 1875, and the Wyoming Territory stretched before her like an endless grave. Banishment was a fate worse than death among her people, the Northern Arapaho, and at 20 summers old, Denali had never imagined herself cast out from everything she had ever known. The accusation had come swiftly. Witchcraft, they said, when the chief's youngest son fell ill after she had treated him with herbs. That the boy recovered 2 days later mattered not. Fear had already taken root, and the Council of Elders had made their decision. Her own father, with tears streaming down his weathered face, had been forced to announce her sentence: banishment, never to return under pain of death. 3 days of walking had left her delirious with thirst and hunger. The small pouch of pemmican they had allowed her to take was gone, and the late April rains had soaked her to the bone the previous night. Denali's dark hair hung in wet ropes around her face as she trudged forward, her deerskin dress mud-spattered and torn. Her legs finally gave out as she crested a small rise. Collapsing to her knees, Denali gazed out at the valley below. Through the haze of exhaustion, she spotted a thin column of smoke rising from a small cabin nestled against the foothills. Civilization, or at least shelter, but her strength was gone. Just a little farther, she whispered to herself, forcing her body to stand once more. She made it halfway down the slope before darkness claimed her. Zachary Caldwell had been tracking the mountain lion for the better part of the day. The beast had killed 2 of his calves in the past week, and he couldn't afford to lose any more of his small herd. He'd left his cabin at dawn, rifle in hand, determination set in his square jaw. At 26, Zach had spent 5 years building his small ranch after returning from the war. He'd fought with the Union, though out here, so far from the battlefields of the East, few cared which side a man had stood with. All that mattered was if you could work, keep your word, and defend what was yours. He was returning home empty-handed, the mountain lion having given him the slip somewhere in the high country, when he spotted the crumpled form on the hillside. Instantly alert, Zach approached cautiously, rifle ready. Outlaws and renegades were common enough in these parts, and a man couldn't be too careful. What he found instead was a young woman, clearly Indian by her dress and features, unconscious and burning with fever. "Dear Lord," he muttered, setting down his rifle and pressing a calloused hand to her forehead. Her skin burned hot against his palm. Without hesitation, Zach gathered the woman into his arms. She was too light, and he could feel her bones through her dress. Whoever she was, she hadn't eaten properly in days. He lifted her gently, mindful of injuries he couldn't see, and began the half-mile trek back to his cabin. "Hang on," he murmured, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Just hang on." Denali awoke to the crackle of a fire and the scent of cooking meat. For a moment she thought she was back in her family's lodge, that her banishment had been nothing but a terrible dream. Then the pain in her feet and the unfamiliar surroundings brought reality crashing back. She was lying on a simple wooden bed covered with thick furs. A cabin, small but sturdy, surrounded her. A fire burned in a stone hearth, where a pot bubbled with something that made her empty stomach clench with hunger. And a white man, stood with his back to her, stirring the contents of the pot. Fear surged through her. She had heard stories of what white men did to Indian women found alone. Denali tried to rise silently, but her weakened body betrayed her. A soft groan escaped her lips as pain shot through her feet. The man turned instantly, and Denali froze. He was tall, with broad shoulders and arms corded with muscle from hard labor. His face, tanned from the sun, was framed by light brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his simple flannel shirt. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, widened when he saw she was awake. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady, the way one might speak to a frightened horse. You're safe here. Denali pressed herself against the wall, her dark eyes never leaving his face. Who are you? She demanded, her English halting but clear. The mission school her father had insisted she attend for 2 years had given her that much, at least. Name's Zachary Caldwell, he replied, keeping his distance. Found you collapsed on the hillside. You've been out for nearly a day with fever. He gestured to her feet, which she now noticed were cleaned and wrapped in strips of cloth. Your feet were in a bad way. Where were you heading? Denali said nothing, watching him warily. Where was she heading? She had no destination, no place that would welcome her now. Zachary seemed to understand her silence. He turned back to the pot, ladling stew into a wooden bowl. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, he said, his back to her again in a gesture that seemed deliberately unthreatening. But you need to eat, and those feet need time to heal. He approached slowly, holding out the bowl. Steam rose from the rich broth, filled with chunks of meat and wild onions. Denali's hunger overcame her suspicion, and she accepted the bowl with trembling hands. Thank you, she murmured, the words feeling strange on her tongue. Thanking a white man, her father would be shocked. What's your name? Zachary asked, retreating to give her space. She hesitated, then decided there was little harm in telling him. Denali Blackfoot. That's a mountain name, isn't it? She nodded, surprised he would know. The tallest mountain in the North Country. My mother's people came from there, long ago. Well, Miss Blackfoot, you're welcome to stay until you're healed up enough to travel. He paused, then added quietly, and longer, if you need it. Denali studied him as she ate, trying to understand his kindness. Perhaps he wanted something from her. Men always wanted something, yet there was nothing in his eyes that suggested ulterior motives, just concern and a certain directness she found oddly comforting. Why help me? She finally asked. I am Arapaho. Your people and mine are not friends. Zachary shrugged, his broad shoulders rising and falling beneath his worn shirt. Out here, a person in need is just that, a person. I don't much care what color their skin is, or what language they pray in. A shadow crossed his face. Saw enough men die in the war to know we're all the same underneath. He stood and moved to the door. I need to check on my livestock. Rest. There's more stew if you're still hungry. After he left, Denali finished her food. Then, despite her wariness, exhaustion pulled her back into sleep. For 3 days, Denali kept to herself, speaking little as her strength returned. Zachary respected her silence, going about his daily chores, leaving food for her, and changing the bandages on her feet with gentle hands that belied his rugged appearance. On the 4th morning, she limped to the cabin door, watching as he split logs for firewood. His shirt was off despite the spring chill, and sweat glistened on his back as he swung the axe in powerful, precise strokes. Denali found herself studying the play of muscles beneath his skin, the way the rising sun caught in his hair. When he turned and saw her standing there, his face broke into a smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. You're up, he said, driving the axe into the chopping block and retrieving his shirt. How are the feet feeling? Better, she replied. I can help with work now. I do not wish to be burden. Zachary shook his head as he pulled his shirt over his head. You're not a burden, Denali, but if you're feeling up to it, I wouldn't mind some help with the garden. Spring planting needs doing, and I'm already behind. The garden, a small plot behind the cabin, had been partially turned but not yet planted. Working the soil with her hands felt good after days of inactivity. As they worked side by side, Denali found herself telling him about the healing plants she knew, which ones grew wild in these mountains. My grandmother taught me, she explained, carefully placing bean seeds in the furrows Zachary had dug. She was medicine woman for our band. She was teaching me when... She stopped, the pain of her banishment still too raw. Zachary waited, not pressing when she fell silent. Instead, he asked, "Would any of those plants grow here? Might be useful to have medicinal herbs close at hand." His casual acceptance, the way he didn't question her knowledge or skills, loosened something in her chest. By midday, they had laid out a section of the garden for her healing plants, with Denali explaining where to find seeds and which ones could be transplanted from the wild. As days turned into weeks, a routine developed between them. Zachary tended his small herd of cattle and worked on improvements to the cabin and outbuildings. Denali kept the garden, foraged for wild foods and herbs, and slowly took over the cooking. Neither spoke much about their pasts, but in the quiet evenings, sitting before the fire, they began to share small pieces of themselves. Denali learned that Zachary had come west after the war, unable to face the memories that haunted him back in Pennsylvania. He had no family left, his parents dead from fever before the war, and his only brother fallen at Gettysburg. The isolation of the Wyoming Territory suited him, he said, though sometimes the loneliness cut deep. In turn, she told him of growing up among the Northern Arapaho, of her father who had insisted she learn the white man's language and ways, believing it was the only path to survival for their people. She spoke of her grandmother's wisdom and the joy she had found in learning the healing arts, but she did not speak of her banishment. That wound was still too fresh, the shame too great. Each night she would lie on the pallet Zachary had made for her near the hearth and wonder what he would think if he knew the truth that her own people had cast her out, believing her touched by evil spirits. May turned to June, and with it came the full bloom of the mountain summer. The garden thrived under Denali's care, and her herb patch flourished. Zachary had built a small lean-to beside the cabin where she could dry and store her plants. "You've made this place better," he told her one evening as they sat outside, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Before you came, it was just a place to sleep. Now it feels like..." "Like what?" she asked when he didn't finish. His blue eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Like a home," he said finally. Denali looked away, her heart beating faster. She had begun to feel it too, this sense of belonging that she had never expected to find again. But it couldn't last. She was Arapaho. He was white. And she carried the stigma of banishment, a woman rejected by her own kind. "I should leave soon," she said quietly, though the words pained her. "When summer ends." Zachary's face fell, but he nodded slowly. "If that's what you want. But you should know, you're welcome to stay. For as long as you like." Before she could respond, the distant sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Zachary was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle that was never far from reach. "Get inside," he told her, his voice tense. "Might be nothing, but better safe than sorry." Denali hurried into the cabin, watching through the window as 3 riders appeared at the edge of the clearing. Even from a distance, she recognized the man in the lead, Benjamin Miller, owner of the largest ranch in the valley, and a man known for his hatred of Indians. She had seen him once in the nearby settlement when Zachary had taken her to trade for supplies. The contempt in his eyes had made her shrink behind Zachary's protective presence. Now, as the men dismounted and approached Zachary, she could see the same contempt in Miller's stance. "Caldwell," Miller's voice carried clearly through the open window. "Thought you should know there's talk in town about you keeping an Indian squaw out here." "What I do on my own property isn't anyone's concern," Zachary replied, his voice level but with an edge Denali had never heard before. Miller spat on the ground. "Becomes everyone's concern when Indians start raiding again. That Arapaho band that came through last month lost a few horses to rustlers. They're blaming white settlers." "And that has what to do with me or my guest?" "Guest?" Miller laughed, an ugly sound. That what you call it? Listen, Caldwell. I fought Indians in the Black Hills. I know what they're capable of. How do you know she ain't spying for her people? Learning our defenses? Zachary took a step forward, his hand still resting on his rifle. I think you'd better leave, Miller. Just giving friendly advice, Miller said, though nothing about his tone was friendly. Folks around here don't take kindly to Indian lovers, especially not with tensions the way they are. He looked toward the cabin and Denali stepped back from the window. You'd do well to send her back to her people before something unfortunate happens. The threat hung in the air between them. Denali felt sick with fear not for herself, but for Zachary. She knew what men like Miller were capable of. And it was her presence that had brought this danger to Zachary's door. After the riders left, Zachary came inside, his face grim. Denali was already gathering her few possessions. What are you doing? He asked, seeing the small bundle she was creating. I must go, she said firmly. That man, he will bring trouble to you because of me. Miller's all talk, Zachary replied, though the tightness around his eyes belied his casual tone. He's been trying to push me off this land since I settled here. He doesn't like that my property controls access to the north pastures. This is not about land, Denali insisted. It is about me, about what I am. And what are you, exactly? Zachary asked, stepping closer to her. Because all I see is a woman who's brought life and healing to a place that had neither before she came. His words stopped her, the simple truth in them cutting through her fear. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close he stood, of the warmth radiating from his body. Why do you want me to stay? She whispered. Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, his hand gently cupped her cheek. Because in all my life, I've never met anyone like you, Denali Blackfoot. And the thought of you leaving tears me apart inside. The honesty in his voice, in his eyes, broke through the last of her defenses. Denali leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of it. If I stay, she said softly, they will come back. With more men. Then we'll face them together, Zachary replied. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, sending shivers down her spine. I lost everything once before. I won't lose you too. Not without a fight. In that moment, with the last light of day filtering through the cabin windows, Denali made her choice. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Zachary's arms encircled her, pulling her gently against him as he returned her kiss with a passion that made her head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Stay and help me make this place a real home. Yes, she answered simply. And for the first time since her banishment, Denali felt as though she truly belonged somewhere. The next morning, Zachary rode into town alone, despite Denali's protests. He needed supplies, he said, and also wanted to gauge the mood after Miller's visit. He returned by midday, his pack horse laden with goods, including bolts of fabric that he presented to Denali with a shy smile. Thought you might like to make some new clothes, he explained, and curtains for the windows, maybe. Whatever you want. The gift touched her deeply. Among her people, such practical items were valued far more than trinkets or jewels. That Zachary understood this without her having to explain spoke volumes about his respect for her ways. As they unpacked the supplies, Zachary mentioned casually, "Ran into Reverend Adams in town. He's riding circuit. Be here through next week." Denali nodded, not understanding the significance. Christian preachers sometimes visited the Indian agencies, though few of her people paid them much mind. He performs marriages, Zachary continued, suddenly very interested in organizing the sacks of flour and sugar on the shelves. Legal ones, recognized by the territory. Denali's hands stilled on the bolt of blue calico she'd been admiring. Marriages? She repeated, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. Zachary turned to face her, his expression a mix of hope and vulnerability she'd never seen before. I know it's sudden, he said quickly. And maybe not what you want. But I thought, if you were willing. You wish to marry me? Denali asked, needing to hear the words clearly. He crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. Yes, he said firmly. I love you, Denali. I think I've loved you since that first day you stood up from that sickbed and looked at me like I might be the enemy, but you weren't going to back down 1 inch. His smile was tender. I want to build a life with you. Right here. Tears filled Denali's eyes. You do not know everything about me, she whispered. Why I was alone in the wilderness when you found me. Then tell me, he said gently. Whatever it is, it won't change how I feel. The story poured out of her, then the chief's son falling ill after she had treated him, the whispers of witchcraft, the council's decision, her father's tears as he announced her banishment. She told him how she had walked for days, not caring where she went, until exhaustion had claimed her on the hillside above his cabin. When she finished, Zachary's eyes were dark with anger, but not directed at her. They cast you out for healing a child? He asked incredulously. Fear makes people do terrible things, Denali said softly. The sickness came the day after I treated him. They needed someone to blame. And now, if we marry, you'd be turning your back on any chance of reconciliation with your people. Denali touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. My people turned their backs on me first, she said, and I have found a new home here. With you. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Is that a yes, then? Yes, she replied, laughing through her tears as he swept her into his arms and spun her around the small cabin. Yes, I will marry you, Zachary Caldwell. 5 days later, they stood before Reverend Adams in the clearing beside the cabin. Zachary had built an arch of willow branches, which Denali had decorated with wildflowers and sweet-smelling herbs. He wore his best shirt, his only good one, really freshly washed and pressed. Denali wore a dress she had hastily made from the blue calico, embroidered at the neckline with traditional Arapaho patterns. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. The Reverend, an elderly man with kind eyes, showed no surprise or disapproval at uniting a white man and an Indian woman. If anything, he seemed pleased by the match, commenting on the evident love between them. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed Denali with such tenderness that she felt it like a promise, a vow beyond the words they had just spoken. This was her new beginning, her new life. The banishment that had seemed like a death sentence had led her to something she had never expected to find: true love and acceptance. That night, as they lay together in the bed that was now theirs to share, Zachary traced the contours of her face in the moonlight streaming through the window. Tomorrow, he said, I want to start building a proper cabin. This place was fine for a bachelor, but my wife deserves better. This place is already perfect, Denali protested, though she was touched by his desire to provide for her. Not big enough for the family we might have someday, he replied, his voice husky with emotion. I want to build something that will last, Denali. Something our children and their children can call home. The thought of their children filled her with a joy so intense it was almost painful. She had believed that dream lost to her forever when she was cast out by her tribe. Now, in Zachary's arms, all things seemed possible again. Then we will build it together, she said, sealing the promise with a kiss. Summer gave way to autumn, and the new cabin took shape beside the old one. Zachary had chosen a spot with a better view of the valley, where the morning sun would warm the eastern wall and the worst of the winter winds would be blocked by a stand of pines. Denali worked alongside him, learning to notch logs and chink walls with a mixture of clay and grasses. The garden had yielded a bountiful harvest, which Denali preserved for the coming winter. Her herb patch had thrived, and she had begun using her knowledge to help others. Word had spread quietly among the neighboring homesteads that the Indian woman at Caldwell's place knew remedies for various ailments. At first, only the most desperate came a mother with a feverish child, a man with a badly infected wound, but each successful treatment built her reputation. Zachary supported her healing work without reservation, even building her a small shed where she could prepare her medicines undisturbed. He took pride in her skills, often bragging to visitors about how she had saved the Anderson boy when the doctor in town had given up hope. Not everyone approved, of course. Benjamin Miller and his friends made their disapproval known whenever Zachary went to town, with cold shoulders and muttered insults. But for every Miller, there seemed to be 2 or 3 settlers who judged Denali by her actions rather than her heritage. By the first snowfall of November, the new cabin was finished enough to move into. It was larger than the old one, with 2 proper rooms and a loft above that Zachary said would be perfect for children someday. He had even managed to get glass for the windows, an extravagance that had cost dearly, but was worth it for the light it let in. On the day they moved their few possessions into the new home, Zachary surprised Denali with a gift. He had carved a sign to hang beside the door. The words burned carefully into the smooth pine, "Caldwell Home." "Now it's official," he said, watching her face as she traced the letters with her fingertips. "Home," she repeated, the word still holding a kind of magic for her. After months of marriage, of building this life together, sometimes she still woke expecting to find herself alone in the wilderness, her banishment a continuing nightmare. Instead, she would find Zachary's arm around her waist, his breath warm against her neck, and know that this was real, this love, this home they had created together. The winter of 1875-76 was harsh, with storms that buried the cabin in snow and temperatures that froze the creek solid. But inside their new home, Zachary and Denali were warm and content. The days fell into a rhythm of necessary chores and quiet evenings by the fire, where Zachary would whittle or repair harnesses while Denali sewed or prepared her medicines. They talked of many things during those long winter nights, of their hopes for the ranch, of the children they both wanted, of the world beyond their valley that seemed so distant and yet sometimes intruded in unexpected ways. News came infrequently, carried by the occasional traveler brave enough to face the winter trails. Most of it concerned the ongoing conflicts between whites and Indians across the territories. The defeat of Custer at the Little Bighorn the previous summer had heightened tensions everywhere, even in their relatively peaceful corner of Wyoming. "There's talk of the army moving against all the northern tribes," a passing fur trader told them in January, warming himself by their fire. "Don't matter if they were at the Little Bighorn or not, government wants them all on reservations by spring." Denali felt Zachary's hand tighten around hers at this news. Her father's band had already settled near the agency, accepting the inevitable, but many others still roamed free. She thought of her family, wondering if they ever spoke of her, if they regretted their decision to cast her out. The pain had dulled with time and happiness, but it never fully disappeared. "Maybe when spring comes," Zachary said later that night as they lay in bed, "we could try to find your father. Let him know you're safe, that you're—" He hesitated. "That I'm happy?" Denali finished for him. "That I found a good man who sees me for who I am?" She pressed closer to him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Perhaps. But it may be too soon. The wound is still fresh for them." Zachary nodded, understanding in his silence. He never pushed her about her past, accepting that some hurts needed time to heal. As winter slowly released its grip on the land, Denali began to suspect a new life was growing within her. She kept the knowledge to herself at first, wanting to be certain before sharing her joy with Zachary. But as the days lengthened and her courses remained absent for the third month, she could no longer doubt. She chose a perfect moment to tell him, a clear April evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the new spring grass with gold. Zachary had been working all day on the corral, preparing for the new calves soon to be born. "You have been building many things since we met," Denali said, leaning against his shoulder. "A cabin, a home, a life together." "Best work I've ever done," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Soon, you will need to build one more thing," she said, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "A cradle." Zachary went utterly still, then turned to look at her with wonder in his eyes. "A baby?" he whispered. "We're having a baby?" The joy that transformed his face was everything Denali had hoped for. He let out a whoop that echoed across the valley, then gathered her in his arms so carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile as spun glass. "When?" he asked, his hand still resting protectively over her womb. "By autumn, I think. The moon has not come to me for 3 cycles now." His smile was radiant. "A fall baby, born when the world is at its most beautiful." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and dreams for their future. "I'll build the finest cradle any child ever slept in," he vowed. "And we'll need to expand the cabin again, another room for the little one when they're older." Denali laughed at his enthusiasm. "Let us welcome this child first before planning for more rooms," she teased, though in truth, the thought of filling their home with children warmed her heart. In her darkest moments after the banishment, she had feared she would die alone, her line ending with her. Now, with Zachary, she would continue the bloodline of her ancestors, even if her child would walk a different path than she had once expected. The news of the coming baby seemed to energize Zachary. He threw himself into preparations with boundless enthusiasm, expanding the garden, planning improvements to the cabin, and indeed, beginning work on an intricately carved cradle of pine and cedar. Denali's body changed slowly with the advancing pregnancy, her slender form rounding with the new life within. She had never felt more connected to the earth, to the cycles of growth and renewal that surrounded them. The herbs in her garden took on new significance as she gathered those that would ease childbirth and help her recover afterward. Word of her condition spread among the neighboring homesteads, and to her surprise, gifts began to arrive: a patchwork quilt from the Anderson family whose son she had healed, soft flannel blankets from the miller's wife, a tiny pair of leather moccasins from an elderly Shoshone woman who sometimes traded herbs with her. "People respect you," Zachary said, as they admired the growing collection of baby items. "They see what I've always seen: a remarkable woman with a gift for healing and a heart big enough to love even those who fear what they don't understand." Not everyone was welcoming of the news, of course. Benjamin Miller and his friends maintained their distance, and occasionally Zachary would return from town with a tight jaw that told Denali he had heard something that angered him, though he rarely shared the details. As summer reached its peak, a visitor arrived who would change the course of their lives in ways they could not have anticipated. Denali was tending the garden, her 6-month belly making bending difficult when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Shading her eyes against the August sun, she saw a lone rider making his way up the trail to their cabin. Even at a distance, something about the man's posture, the way he sat his horse, stirred a memory. As he drew closer, Denali's hand went to her throat in shock. The rider was Running Elk, her father. She stood frozen as he dismounted and approached, his dark eyes taking in her pregnant form, the flourishing garden, the sturdy cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. He had aged in the year since she had seen him last, new lines etched deeply around his mouth and eyes. "Father," she said in Arapaho, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daughter," he replied in the same tongue, "I see you have found a new life." Before she could respond, Zachary appeared from the barn, alerted by the arrival of a stranger. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip until he saw Denali's expression. "This is my father," she explained in English, her voice trembling slightly. "Running Elk of the Northern Arapaho." Zachary's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he nodded respectfully to the older man. "Sir," he said, "you're welcome in our home." Running Elk studied Zachary with the impassive expression that had intimidated tribal enemies and white negotiators alike. Finally, he inclined his head in acknowledgement. "My daughter has chosen a man with a strong heart," he said in accented but clear English. "This is good." The simple approval, so unexpected, brought tears to Denali's eyes. "How did you find me?" she asked, still struggling to believe he was really standing before her. "I have searched for many moons," Running Elk replied. "The spirits led me here, to see if you lived or had joined our ancestors." His gaze softened as it returned to her rounded belly. "Now I see you not only live, but create new life." Zachary stepped forward, placing a protective arm around Denali's shoulders. "Your daughter is my wife," he said firmly, "recognized by both the law of this territory and the God I was raised to believe in. She is honored here." Running Elk nodded slowly. "This I can see." He hesitated, then added, "The council was wrong to banish you, daughter. The sickness that took the chief's son was seen in other villages later. Many died. It was not your medicine that caused it." The acknowledgement of her innocence, coming so long after her banishment, brought a complex mix of emotions to Denali's heart: relief, vindication, but also a lingering hurt that could not be easily healed. "Will you come inside?" she asked, gesturing toward the cabin. "There is much to tell." Inside, over a meal of venison stew and fresh bread, Running Elk shared the news of their tribe. Many had moved to the reservation as the army's pressure increased. Disease and hunger had taken some of the elders, including the chief who had supported her banishment. Her mother still lived, as did her younger brothers. "She weaves a blanket for your return," Running Elk said, speaking of Denali's mother. "She has not accepted that you would not come back." "And now?" Denali asked, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. "Does the tribe still consider me banished?" Her father's expression grew solemn. "The new chief has lifted the banishment. You may return if you wish." His eyes moved to Zachary, then back to his daughter. "But I see you have built a new life here." The possibility of return of redemption in the eyes of her people was something Denali had stopped allowing herself to dream of. Yet now, with her father sitting at her table, the offer hanging in the air between them, she found the pull of her past was not as strong as she might have expected. She reached for Zachary's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "This is my home now," she said firmly, "with my husband and soon, our child. But I would welcome visits from my family if they wish to know their grandchild." Running Elk's weathered face softened. "Your mother will come when the child is born," he said. "And perhaps your brothers, if the agent allows it." He looked around the cabin, taking in the blend of white and Arapaho influences, the traditional dream catcher hanging beside a crucifix Zachary had carved, the herbs drying from the rafters next to iron cookware. "You have created something new here, daughter. Not white, not Arapaho, but something of both. Perhaps this is the future." Zachary squeezed Denali's hand. "Your daughter has taught me more about courage and healing than I ever knew before," he told Running Elk. "Our child will know both sides of their heritage, the strength and wisdom of the Arapaho, and the determination of their settler ancestors." Running Elk stayed for 3 days, helping Zachary with ranch chores and spending long hours in conversation with Denali, bridging the gap that banishment had created between them. When he left, riding back to the reservation with promises to return before the snow fell, Denali felt a sense of completion she had not known was missing. "Are you happy with your decision?" Zachary asked that night as they lay in bed, his hand gently caressing her rounded belly. "To stay here instead of returning to your people?" Denali turned to face him, tracing the beloved contours of his face in the moonlight. "My people are here now," she said softly. "You, our child, this home we have built together. I would not trade this life for any other." He kissed her then, a kiss full of tenderness and promise, and Denali knew with absolute certainty that the path that had seemed so cruel, the banishment that had torn her from everything familiar, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The first pains began on a crisp October morning as Denali was hanging herbs to dry for the winter. Sharp and insistent, they confirmed what she had sensed upon waking her time had come. She called for Zachary, who had been mending fences in the north pasture. His face, when he realized what was happening, was a mixture of excitement and terror that almost made her laugh, despite the increasing discomfort. "I'll ride for Mrs. Anderson," he said, already reaching for his coat. The older woman had agreed to attend the birth, having helped dozens of neighboring women through their confinements. "There is time," Denali assured him, breathing through another contraction. "The first child often takes many hours to arrive." Nevertheless, Zachary rode out immediately, returning in record time with the capable Mrs. Anderson, whose no-nonsense demeanor calmed them both. Under her direction, the cabin was prepared for the birth water boiled, clean linens laid out, and Denali's own herbal preparations set within easy reach. The labor progressed steadily through the day and into the evening. Zachary remained close, holding Denali's hand through each contraction, wiping her brow with cool cloths and murmuring encouragement when her strength seemed to flag. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he told her as the pains intensified. "You can do this, Denali. Soon we'll meet our child." As midnight approached, the moment finally came. With a final, powerful effort, Denali brought their daughter into the world, a robust infant, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that immediately announced her arrival with lusty cries. "A girl," Mrs. Anderson announced, cleaning and swaddling the newborn with practiced hands. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Zachary's face, as he took his daughter in his arms for the first time, was transformed by a joy so profound it brought tears to Denali's eyes. He knelt beside the bed, carefully placing the tiny bundle in her arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." Denali gazed down at their child, overwhelmed by the fierce love that surged through her. This small life, created from their union, represented everything they had built together, a bridge between two worlds, a new beginning born from what had seemed like an ending. "What shall we name her?" Zachary asked, his finger gently stroking the baby's velvet cheek. Denali considered the traditional names of her people, the names that carried meaning and power. But something else felt right for this child of two worlds. "Aurora," she said finally. "It means dawn in your language, for she is the dawn of something new." Zachary smiled, tears glistening in his blue eyes. "Aurora Caldwell," he repeated, "perfect for our little sunrise." Mrs. Anderson discreetly busied herself with cleaning up, leaving the new family to their private joy. When she finally departed the next morning, promising to return in a few days to check on mother and child, Zachary saw her to her horse with profuse thanks. Alone at last, the small family settled into a new rhythm centered around Aurora's needs. Zachary proved himself an attentive father, willing to walk the floor with his fussing daughter in the middle of the night so Denali could rest. He spoke to the infant constantly, telling her stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania and promising to teach her to ride and rope as soon as she was old enough. Denali recovered quickly from the birth, her knowledge of healing herbs aiding her body's natural processes. Within 2 weeks, she was moving about the cabin freely, tending to Aurora and gradually resuming her normal activities. True to his word, Running Elk returned before the first heavy snow, bringing Denali's mother, Morning Star, with him. The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional, years of separation and misunderstanding melting away in the face of new life. Morning Star took to her granddaughter immediately, crooning traditional songs as she rocked Aurora in the special cradle Zachary had carved. She had brought gifts: a cradle board decorated with intricate beadwork, soft deerskin moccasins, and a tiny medicine pouch to protect the child from harm. "She has your eyes," Morning Star told Denali in Arapaho, studying the infant's face. "But her father's spirit, I think. Strong and determined." Denali smiled, watching as Zachary and her father conversed on the porch, their breath visible in the November air. "She will need both to live in this changing world," she replied. Her mother nodded, her weathered face solemn. "The old ways are fading, daughter. On the reservation, they teach our children to forget their language, to be ashamed of our customs." She looked around the cabin, at the harmonious blend of two cultures Denali had created. "But here, you have found a way to honor both paths. This is wisdom." The visit stretched into weeks as the first heavy snows made travel difficult. Zachary welcomed his in-laws' extended stay, recognizing how much it meant to Denali to bridge the gap between her past and present. He listened attentively as Running Elk shared tribal stories in the evenings, asking thoughtful questions and offering tales of his own background in return. By the time the trails cleared enough for her parents to return to the reservation in early December, Denali felt a healing had taken place not just between herself and her family, but within her own heart. The pain of banishment had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something she could carry without bitterness. "You will visit in the spring," her mother said as they prepared to depart. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. "Bring the little one. She should know her people, even as she walks a different path." Denali promised they would come when the weather permitted travel with an infant. Standing beside Zachary, Aurora bundled warmly against her chest. She watched her parents ride away, with a heart full not of loss, but of gratitude for this unexpected reconciliation. "Are you all right?" Zachary asked, his arm around her shoulders as the riders disappeared from view. "Yes," she replied, and meant it truly. "For the first time since my banishment, I feel whole again. I have my family, both the one I was born to and the one we have created together." He kissed her temple gently. "And we're just beginning, Denali. Just beginning." Winter settled fully over the valley, wrapping their cabin in a blanket of snow and silence. The days grew short, the nights long and cold. But inside their home, warmth and love flourished. Aurora grew stronger daily, her personality emerging curious, determined, and quick to smile, especially at the sound of her father's voice. Zachary continued to work on plans for expanding their ranch in the spring. He had been saving carefully and had enough now to purchase more cattle and perhaps hire help for the busier seasons. Their future, which had once seemed so uncertain, now stretched before them full of promise. On Christmas Eve, a holiday Denali had learned to appreciate through Zachary, they sat before the fire, Aurora sleeping peacefully in her cradle. Outside, snow fell in fat, lazy flakes, adding to the deep drifts that surrounded the cabin. "I have something for you," Zachary said, reaching beneath the small pine tree he had cut and decorated with carved wooden ornaments and strings of dried berries. He handed Denali a flat package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a framed drawing, a detailed sketch of their cabin with the mountains behind it, smoke curling from the chimney, and 3 figures standing on the porch: Zachary, Denali with Aurora in her arms, and at their feet, a large dog. "It's beautiful," she said, tracing the careful lines with her finger. But we don't have a dog. Zachary grinned. Not yet. The second part of your gift is out in the barn. He rose, pulling on his coat. Wait here. He returned moments later with a squirming bundle of fur, a half-grown collie pup with intelligent eyes and a wagging tail. Every ranch needs a good dog, he explained, as the puppy explored the cabin, sniffing curiously at the sleeping Aurora's cradle. And every child should grow up with one. His name is Scout. Denali laughed as the puppy bounded into her lap, licking her face enthusiastically. He's perfect, she said, scratching behind the dog's ears. Thank you. Later, after Aurora had been fed and settled back to sleep, they lay in bed listening to the wind whistle around the eaves. Scout had claimed a spot near the hearth, curled into a contented ball of fur. I never thought I could be this happy, Zachary murmured, his arms around Denali, her head resting on his chest. After the war, I was so lost. I came west thinking I'd just find a quiet place to exist until the memories faded. Instead, I found you. Denali pressed closer to him, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. And I believed my life was over when my people cast me out, she replied softly. I walked without purpose or hope, until I collapsed on your hillside. Providence, Zachary said, kissing the top of her head. Or the Great Spirit, as your father would say. Something larger than ourselves brought us together. And now we have Aurora, Denali added, thinking of their sleeping daughter. So full of possibility. A new dawn for both our worlds. The first of many children, I hope, Zachary said, his hand caressing her back. I want this valley filled with our family sons and daughters who will carry forward the best of both our heritages. Denali smiled in the darkness, already feeling the stirring of desire for more children. We have time, she murmured, turning her face up to his. A lifetime together. His kiss was tender at first, then deepened with passion that still took her breath away. In his arms, Denali found the belonging she had sought all her life, not with her tribe, not in the white man's world, but here. In this space they had created together, where love transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the valley in pristine white. Inside their cabin, their home, the future took shape in dreams shared between kisses, in plans whispered in the dark, in the steady breathing of their child sleeping nearby. The banishment that had seemed like the end of Denali's world had led her to Zachary, to Aurora, to this life that exceeded anything she could have imagined. And as she drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, Denali knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Spring arrived gradually, melting the snow and bringing new growth to the valley. Aurora, now 6 months old, was sitting up on her own and reaching for everything within grasp, her dark eyes bright with curiosity about the world around her. Scout had grown into his paws, developing into a capable herding dog who followed Zachary faithfully on his daily rounds of the ranch. As promised, when the trails dried enough for safe travel, they made the journey to the reservation to visit Denali's family. The trip was Zachary's first real exposure to reservation life, and the conditions shocked him: the cramped quarters, the poor quality of government rations, the obvious efforts to strip away traditional culture. How can they live like this? He asked Denali quietly as they watched Aurora being fussed over by a circle of admiring relatives. Your people had the whole territory once, and now they're confined to this small space? This is why my father insisted I learn your language and ways, Denali replied, the old pain evident in her voice. He saw this coming long ago. The old life is ending, whether we wish it or not. The visit strengthened her conviction that the path they had chosen, creating something new that honored both heritages, was the right one for their family. Aurora would grow up knowing her Arapaho relatives and customs, but also with the freedom and opportunities that came with her father's world. Upon their return home, Zachary threw himself into expanding their ranch. With the money he had saved, he purchased additional cattle and hired 2 young men from town to help with the spring roundup. To his satisfaction, both workers treated Denali with respect, quickly coming to appreciate her knowledge of plants and healing. As Aurora's first birthday approached in October 1877, Denali discovered she was expecting their second child. The news delighted Zachary, who immediately began planning another expansion to the cabin. "We'll need more room for our growing family," he insisted, sketching plans for a new bedroom. "And perhaps a dedicated space for your healing work. More and more people are coming to you for help." It was true. Over the past year, Denali's reputation as a healer had spread throughout the valley. Settlers who had once viewed her with suspicion now sought her remedies for everything from fevers to difficult pregnancies. She had begun keeping careful records of her treatments, combining her grandmother's traditional knowledge with the medical books Zachary ordered for her from Denver. The winter of 1877-78 was milder than the previous one, allowing work on the cabin expansion to continue intermittently. By spring, the new addition was complete: a spacious bedroom for Aurora and future siblings, plus a small room off the kitchen where Denali could prepare and store her medicines without interruption. Their second child, a son they named William Running Elk Caldwell, arrived in late May 1878. Unlike his sister's lengthy birth, William came quickly, entering the world just 2 hours after Denali's labor began. Zachary barely had time to fetch Mrs. Anderson before his son made his appearance, red-faced and indignant at having been thrust into the world with so little ceremony. "He has your impatience," Denali teased her husband as they admired the newborn. "Always rushing ahead." Zachary couldn't stop grinning as he cradled his son. "And your strength," he replied, noting the infant's firm grip on his finger. "He'll be a fine horseman one day." Aurora, now 18 months old and talking in a mixture of English and Arapaho words, approached the baby cautiously under her father's watchful eye. "Baby," she said solemnly, patting her brother's head with surprising gentleness. "My baby." "Your brother," Zachary corrected, though his heart swelled at his daughter's immediate acceptance. "You'll help Mama take care of him, won't you?" Aurora nodded with all the seriousness a toddler could muster, and Denali felt tears spring to her eyes at the sight of her family complete in a way she had never dared to dream possible during those dark days of her banishment. Running Elk and Morning Star arrived 2 weeks after William's birth, eager to meet their new grandson. This time, they brought Denali's youngest brother, Swift Arrow, with them. At 16, he was caught between worlds, educated at the reservation school, but still deeply connected to the traditional ways Running Elk had insisted on maintaining in their family. During their stay, Swift Arrow followed Zachary everywhere, eager to learn about ranching and the white man's ways of raising cattle. Zachary took to the boy immediately, teaching him to ride Western style and showing him how to mend fences and care for the livestock. "Your brother has a good mind for this work," Zachary told Denali one evening as they watched Swift Arrow help gentle a new foal. "He picks things up faster than the hired hands I've had." An idea began to form in Denali's mind, one that might benefit both her brother and their growing ranch. "Perhaps he could stay?" she suggested cautiously. "Learn from you, help with the work." The agent might permit it as a form of education in white ways. Zachary considered this, watching the young man's confident handling of the horses. "I'd be glad to teach him everything I know," he said finally. "And truth be told, I could use the help, especially with you busy with the little ones." The arrangement was made with surprising ease. The Indian agent, impressed by what he considered Zachary's civilizing influence, granted permission for Swift Arrow to live with the Caldwells as an apprentice rancher. Running Elk, seeing opportunity for his son that didn't exist on the reservation, gave his blessing as well. As Swift Arrow settled into life at the ranch, Denali felt her two worlds drawing closer together. Her brother brought news of the tribe, keeping their connection to the Arapaho community alive, while eagerly embracing the new skills Zachary taught him. The summer and fall of 1878 passed in a blur of activity. The ranch prospered, with a good market for their cattle and increasing recognition of Zachary's skill as a breeder. Denali's healing practice continued to grow, with people now traveling from as far as the railroad town 40 miles away to seek her treatments. Benjamin Miller and his friends maintained their distance, but their open hostility had faded to sullen acceptance as more and more of their neighbors came to respect the unusual family at the Caldwell Ranch. Even the new minister in town, initially wary of Denali's traditional healing practices, had been won over when she saved his wife from a dangerous fever using a poultice of herbs that the doctor's medicines couldn't touch. By the time William celebrated his first birthday in May 1879, the Caldwell Ranch had become known throughout the region as a place where the best of two cultures met. Zachary's progressive ranching methods blended with Denali's deep knowledge of the land and its healing plants. "We've built something special here," Zachary said one evening as they sat on the porch watching Aurora and William play with Scout in the yard. Swift Arrow was in the corral beyond, working with a young horse. "Something that's bigger than just us now." Denali leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "When I was banished, I thought my life was over," she said softly. "Now I see it was just beginning." Zachary took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "The best is still ahead of us, Denali. I promise you that." And as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple, Denali believed him with all her heart. From the ashes of banishment, they had built not just a cabin, not just a home, but a future one where the best of both their worlds could flourish together. In the years that followed, the Caldwell Ranch grew and prospered. Zachary's innovative breeding practices resulted in cattle particularly well-suited to the harsh Wyoming climate, while Denali's healing skills brought people from across the territory seeking her treatments. Their family expanded too. A third child, a daughter named Elizabeth Morning Star, arrived in 1880, followed by twin boys, James and Joseph, in 1882. Swift Arrow eventually married a young woman from a neighboring ranch, building his own cabin on Caldwell land and becoming Zachary's full partner in the ranching operation. Aurora grew into a confident young woman who combined her father's practical nature with her mother's healing abilities, while William showed an early talent for working with horses that surpassed even his father's skill. The cabin that Zachary had built for Denali in those early days remained standing even as larger, more modern structures rose around it. It became a symbol of their beginning, a reminder of how a single act of kindness toward a banished woman had grown into a legacy that would endure for generations. And on summer evenings, long after their children were grown with families of their own, Zachary and Denali would often sit together on the porch of that first cabin, their hands intertwined, watching the sunset paint the valley in the same golden light that had blessed their union so many years before. "Was it worth it?" Zachary would sometimes ask, his hair now silver but his blue eyes still bright with love for her. "Leaving your people? Building this life with a stubborn cowboy?" And Denali, the lines of wisdom etched deeply in her face, would always smile and squeeze his hand. "It was not leaving, but finding," she would reply. "Finding you, finding us, finding home." For that was what Zachary had given her, not just shelter from the wilderness, not just a cabin made of logs and hope, but a true home. A place where she belonged completely, where banishment had transformed into belonging, where love had built something that neither of them could have created alone. And that was a gift beyond measuring, a love story written not just in their hearts, but in the very land around them, in the ranch that bore their name, in the children and grandchildren who carried forward their legacy of two worlds united as one.